The Silk Road is a story we tell too late. For centuries before its official opening, a hidden web of connections already spanned continents. This video is an investigation into a deeper, older world of exchange, a time when goods, ideas, and technologies moved across vast distances without the empires and official caravans we associate with the famous route. By the end, you will understand how our ancient world was globally connected far earlier than any textbook suggests. We will uncover how precious stones from Afghanistan reached Egyptian pharaohs, and why Baltic amber found its way into Greek royal tombs, all centuries before the Silk Road was named. These forgotten networks challenge everything we assume about isolation in the ancient past. What does it mean to discover that our history has always been one of connection? To see these ancient connections, we must first look past the idea of simple trade. A transcontinental exchange network is something far more profound. It is a living system, a persistent current flowing between distant worlds. Goods are just the most visible part of it. Think of a stone dropped into a still pond. The splash is the object itself, perhaps a carved piece of jade, but the ripples that spread out in every direction, those are everything else that travels with it. The technology needed to carve that jade, the artistic style that inspired its shape, the myths and meanings attached to the stone, even the unseen passengers like new seeds or illness, they all move along the same channels. This network transfers the very building blocks of culture itself across vast geographical and cultural boundaries. Crucially, this movement rarely involved a single merchant traveling from one end of the world to the other. More often, it worked like a centuries-long relay race. An item would pass from one community to a neighboring one, then to the next, and the next, in a process scholars call down the line exchange. With each handoff, the story of the object might change, its value could transform, and new ideas would stick to it like dust on a long journey. By the time a cowrie shell from the Maldives reached a village in inland China, or a piece of Baltic amber was placed in a Mycenaean tomb, it had crossed not just miles but countless cultural thresholds. So what are we searching for as evidence of these pre-Silk Road highways? We need more than a single lucky find. We look for patterns that show sustained contact over centuries, not a brief encounter. We look for impact, for how these foreign objects and ideas changed the societies that received them, integrating into their technology, their art, their very identity. And most of all, we look for scale, connections that truly bridge major separate worlds, like the steppes of Central Asia and the palaces of the Mediterranean, or the forests of Siberia and the courts of early China. When we find these three things together, we have found a lost network, a hidden artery of the ancient world. This timeline, we all know, is built on a profound contradiction. The classical Silk Road is formally dated from the 2nd century before the Common Era, following the diplomatic missions of the Han dynasty. Yet the objects tell a different, much older story. For decades, archaeologists have been unearthing artifacts in places they simply should not be, artifacts that are centuries, even millennia, older than that official opening date. A Mesopotamian cylinder seal found in Bronze Age Greece, dated to around 1400 before the Common Era. Lapis lazuli, a vivid blue stone that comes only from the mountains of modern Afghanistan, discovered in royal Egyptian tombs from before 2000 before the Common Era. These are not isolated accidents, they are pieces of a pattern, evidence of sustained, long-distance interaction happening in the deep shadows of what we call history. The puzzle for researchers is not just finding these objects, but correctly reading their story. One of the greatest methodological challenges is distinguishing between an heirloom and a trade item. Was this beautiful piece of amber found in a Mycenaean grave a recent import from the far north, brought through active exchange networks? Or was it a treasured family possession passed down for generations before finally being buried, meaning it arrived much earlier than the burial itself suggests? Untangling this requires incredible scientific detective work, analyzing everything from the wear on the object to microscopic residues, all to answer one deceptively simple question. When did this journey actually happen? As this evidence mounts, it forces a dramatic shift. It pushes the horizon of complex, transcontinental exchange back into the heart of the Bronze Age, a period from roughly 3000 to 1200 before the Common Era, and hints at connections even older than that. This means that for over 1,000 years before the Silk Road got its name, other highways were already in operation, moving more than just silk. They moved the very ingredients of civilization itself across continents, setting the stage for everything that would follow. The story of this ancient connectivity is written across the grasslands. If we are searching for the first true transcontinental highway, we need to look not to a paved road, but to an ocean of grass, the vast Eurasian steppe. This immense corridor, stretching unbroken from the edges of Eastern Europe all the way to the plains of Manchuria, formed the primordial superhighway of the ancient world. Its geography was its genius. Unlike dense forests or towering mountain ranges, the steppe presented a relatively flat, open landscape, a seamless belt of navigable terrain. This was not a barrier, but an invitation to movement on a continental scale. For too long, the nomadic pastoralist cultures who mastered this environment were dismissed in historical narratives as peripheral raiders, the so-called barbarians at the gates of civilization. This view is not just outdated, it is fundamentally incorrect. These communities were the essential engineers and agents of the first transcontinental network. Their entire way of life was built on mobility and long-distance seasonal movement with their herds. They did not simply live on the steppe, they became a living, breathing part of its connective tissue. The evidence for their role as cultural conduits is not hidden. It is stamped across the archaeological record of an entire continent. Consider the revolutionary technology of the chariot. Its lightning-fast spread from its likely origins in the Pontic-Caspian steppe around 2000 before the Common Era is almost impossible to explain without these highly mobile societies. They did not just use chariots, they perfected and propagated them, carrying the knowledge of spoked wheels and horse-drawn warfare into the heartlands of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China. This was not a slow trickle of ideas, it was a technological wildfire sweeping across Eurasia. We see the same pattern with the composite bow, a powerful weapon crafted from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, and with the distinctive animal-style art. This artistic tradition, featuring dynamic, often intertwined depictions of stags, eagles, and mythical beasts, appears with striking similarity in artifacts from the Black Sea to the Ordos Plateau of China, centuries before any official trade route existed. These were not isolated artistic flourishes, they were a visual language, a cultural signature that moved with people and their goods. The steppe was not a blank space between civilizations, it was the dynamic core of a networking system. The pastoralists were the original long-distance specialists, carrying not only tangible goods but the intangible blueprints for new technologies, social structures, and artistic visions. They connected worlds that appeared separate on a map, proving that the roots of global exchange are found not in the palaces of emperors, but in the seasonal rhythms of life on the open grassland. That signature blue was more than a color, it was a destination. Among the earliest and most powerful proofs of these deep-time networks is the story of a single stone, Lapis Lazuli. Its journey is a map of desire written across continents. This vivid blue stone, often flecked with golden pyrite that mimics a starry night sky, held a sacred, almost magical status in the ancient world. For the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, it was not merely decorative, it was divine. They associated it with the heavens, with the gods, and with ultimate authority. Yet this stone, so central to their identity, came from a single, incredibly remote source, locked in the mountains of modern Afghanistan. The Sar-I Sang mines in the region of Badakhshan were, for thousands of years, the only known source of high-quality Lapis Lazuli in the entire ancient world. This fact creates a perfect archaeological detective story. Every single piece of Lapis Lazuli found in the ancient Near East or the Mediterranean had to begin a journey of over 1,500 miles across some of the most formidable terrain on Earth, including the towering Hindu Kush Mountains and the arid Iranian plateau. And we know this journey was not a rare event, but a sustained, organized endeavor. The evidence is breathtakingly old. In the royal cemetery of in southern Mesopotamia, dating to around 2,500 before the Common Era, Queen Puabi was laid to rest adorned in spectacular lapis lazuli jewelry, including an elaborate headdress of golden leaves and lapis beads. This was not an isolated treasure. Cylinder seals, inlays for statues, and ceremonial objects made from this Afghan stone are found across Mesopotamian sites centuries before the concept of a unified empire. Even more strikingly, by the time of Egypt's Middle Kingdom, around 2000 before the Common Era, lapis lazuli appears in the finest jewelry of pharaohs, meticulously carved into scarabs and set alongside gold. The stone had crossed another vast cultural threshold. So what does this imply? First, it reveals a supply chain of astonishing complexity and resilience, operating for over a millennium before the Silk Road. This was not casual barter, it was organized procurement. Mining the stone required labor and skill, then it had to be rough cut and prepared for travel. From there, it entered the relay system, likely passing through intermediary cultures in the Indus Valley and the Iranian plateau, each adding value or taking a share before finally reaching the royal workshops of Sumer or Egypt. Second, it shows a shared transcontinental value system. Cultures separated by deserts and mountains with different languages and gods agreed on one thing: the supreme worth of this deep blue stone from a distant mountain. They were connected not by politics or conquest, but by a common aspiration, a shared aesthetic and spiritual language written in mineral form. The Lapis Lazuli Trail was not just moving a commodity, it was transmitting a dream of the cosmos, proving that the ancient world's most cherished symbols were born from global connections we are only beginning to trace. But bronze, the very metal that defines an age, presents a profound logistical puzzle. To create it, you need two ingredients, copper and tin. While copper deposits are relatively widespread, sources of tin are extraordinarily rare in nature. This geological accident meant that the great bronze-producing civilizations of Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and the Mediterranean were often sitting atop vast copper wealth, yet they were utterly dependent on tin sources hundreds or even thousands of miles away. The entire technological foundation of their societies, from weapons to tools to ceremonial objects, relied on a supply chain that stretched across continents. This necessity forged the tin routes, arguably the most critical and fragile economic network of the Bronze Age. Scholars have traced potential sources to a handful of key regions: the mines of Cornwall in distant Britain, deposits in the Erzgebirge Mountains of Central Europe, sources in Anatolia, modern Turkey, and potentially in Central Asia. The challenge is that tin ore, once smelted and cast into ingots, is virtually indistinguishable by source, making the exact paths difficult to map with certainty. Yet the logical and archaeological evidence is compelling. We find bronze objects of nearly identical composition and style appearing across vast distances. To explain this, we must follow the tin. A tin ingot mined in Cornwall might travel by boat along Atlantic and Mediterranean coasts, passing through many hands before reaching a workshop in Mycenaean Greece. Tin from Central Asia could move south into the Indus Valley cities like Harappa or west toward Mesopotamia. This was not optional trade, it was a strategic imperative. The search for tin would have been a powerful driver of exploration, pushing merchants and emissaries further than they might have gone for luxury goods alone. It created a web of interdependencies where a disruption in one distant mining region could ripple through the economies of multiple civilizations. A drought, a conflict, or a shift in political alliances along the route could literally threaten the bronze supply for an entire kingdom. This vulnerability reveals a startling truth about the ancient world. Its greatest technological achievements were built on a foundation of profound global interconnection. The Bronze Age was not a series of isolated brilliant cultures. It was a fragile, interdependent system, humming with activity along invisible highways, all to secure the rare element that turned copper into the metal that shaped the world. While bronze forged the tools of power, another stone shaped the soul of civilization. Jade, or more precisely nephrite, possessed a meaning that transcended its physical form. Unlike Lapis Lazuli, which traveled westward, jade in East Asia moved primarily eastward, along arteries of desire that connected the remote Central Asian mountains to the very heart of early Chinese culture. This was not a trade in mere ornament, but a sacred exchange, and its routes form some of the most enduring and spiritually charged networks in human history. We see two distinct jade worlds in ancient Eurasia. In Europe, communities from the Neolithic era prized jadate from the high Alps, crafting polished axes that circulated over hundreds of miles, likely as tokens of prestige or spiritual power. But the scale and depth of the Chinese jade tradition are almost unparalleled. For over 5,000 years, the primary source was the distant Tarim Basin, in what is now the Xinjiang region, particularly the riverbeds around Cotton. This means the most culturally significant material in early China came from over 1,000 miles to the west, across the daunting Taklamakan Desert and the towering Pamir Mountains. The proof of this ancient connection lies in the artifacts themselves. Long before any historical record of the Silk Road, take the Hongshan culture, which flourished in northeastern China around 3,500 before the Common Era. Their artisans produced stunning jade artifacts, iconic coiled dragons, and unique ritual objects, with a material that geological testing confirms originated from those Central Asian deposits. Similarly, the Liangzhu culture in the Yangtze River Delta, a millennium later, created breathtakingly sophisticated jade Kong tubes and Bai discs, objects of immense ritual power from the same Western stone. This is a staggering revelation. It means that at the very dawn of Chinese complex society, its most sacred artistic tradition was fundamentally dependent on a long-distance supply chain stretching deep into Inner Asia. These were not random finds, but the core of their spiritual and political expression. The journey of the stone itself would have been an epic undertaking. Raw jade boulders were likely extracted or collected in Cotton, then transported eastward, possibly through a series of intermediary oasis communities and pastoralist groups, each stage adding to its mythic value. By the time it reached the workshops of the Hongshan or Liangzhu, it was already imbued with the power of a distant, almost mythical landscape. This jade road establishes a profound truth. The cultural identity of early China, so often portrayed as introspective and isolated, was in fact woven from threads that reached far across the continent. Centuries before empires and official caravans, the longing for this singular green stone created a permanent corridor of meaning, a silent highway where faith and beauty traveled hand in hand with the raw material itself. Yet at the very center of this emerging web, a forgotten civilization thrived. Between the great river valleys and the open steppe, in the oasis regions of modern Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and northern Afghanistan, a society of astonishing sophistication built a world of its own. This is the Bactria Margiana archaeological complex, known to archaeologists as the Oxus civilization, flourishing from around 2300 to 1700 before the Common Era. To call it a mere culture would be a profound understatement. It was a nexus, a brilliant central processing unit for the ancient world's earliest data streams of goods and ideas. The Oxus people constructed imposing fortified centers with monumental gateways and elaborate temples, evidence of a complex hierarchical society. But their true power was not in their walls but in their connections. Archaeologists digging at sites like Gonner de Paix have uncovered a treasure trove that reads like a manifest of the Bronze Age world. In one layer, they find distinctively carved Indus Valley seals used for stamping bales of goods. In another, they uncover pottery painted in styles echoing the distant Iranian plateau. Their own workshops produced exquisite metalwork, vessels and ornaments of silver and bronze, whose artistic motifs seem to speak a hybrid language, blending elements from Mesopotamia, the Steppe, and the Indus. This was not a collection of random foreign trinkets. This was the curated inventory of a central hub. Geographically, the Oxus civilization sat at the perfect crossroads. To the southwest lay the urban worlds of Mesopotamia and Elam. To the southeast were the great cities of the Indus Valley, like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. To the north and east stretched the boundless Eurasian steppe, home to the pastoralist networks. The Oxus people became the essential middlemen, the filters and translators of this continental exchange. They did not just passively receive goods, they actively processed them. A raw material or a rough trade item would arrive from one direction, be worked, refined, or repackaged with local artistic flair, and then sent onward with new value and meaning attached. They took steppe-style animal art and rendered it in precious metal for southern elites. They absorbed Mesopotamian religious symbols and reinterpreted them in local temple complexes. In doing so, they acted as a cultural capacitor, smoothing the flow of ideas across vast ecological and cultural boundaries. The Oxus civilization's ultimate legacy was this role as a crucible. It took the disparate streams of the ancient world and fused them into something new, proving that the most innovative spaces in human history are often not the isolated centers of power, but the vibrant, connected crossroads in between. While the steppe provided a continental highway, another world of connection was being charted across the trackless blue. Long before caravans snaked through mountain passes, ancient mariners were mastering the rhythms of the sea, building networks that moved not around continents but directly between them. This maritime prelude operated in a parallel, often earlier dimension, powered by a profound understanding of wind, current, and celestial navigation. The technology that made this possible evolved from the simple to the sophisticated, beginning with bundles of reeds or logs lashed together into buoyant rafts. These vessels, like the papyrus reed boats of the ancient Egyptians, were remarkably seaworthy, capable of river and coastal journeys that linked communities along the Nile and into the Red Sea. But the true revolution came with the development of plank-built ships, where wooden boards were fastened together to create a hull, allowing for larger, more durable vessels that could carry substantial cargo and venture further from the comforting sight of land. The question that captivates researchers is not if these early sailors traveled, but how far and how regularly they dared to cross open water. Could a voyage be a planned, repeatable commercial endeavor, or was it a rare, desperate gamble against the waves? The evidence suggests a middle ground of astonishing capability. These were not random drifts, but journeys guided by generations of accumulated knowledge, sailors who read the seasonal monsoon winds like a map and followed the paths of migratory birds. They traveled in stages, hopping from island to island or following coastlines, establishing a chain of contact that turned separate shores into a single, interacting system. This maritime web did not replace the land networks, it complemented and connected them, creating a truly global circuit. A piece of obsidian from the Aegean could find its way to Egypt, while shells from the Indian Ocean might appear in Mesopotamian cities, all because someone had learned to trust a boat to carry them beyond the horizon. The scale of these voyages reshapes our understanding of ancient courage and curiosity, proving that the human urge to explore and connect is as old as our ability to build a vessel that floats. While the open ocean presented its mysteries, another maritime system thrived closer to home, operating with the precision of a modern shipping lane. In the warm waters of the Persian Gulf, one of history's first documented and meticulously organized sea trading networks came to life, driven by the relentless demand of Mesopotamia's burgeoning cities. This was not a haphazard collection of fishing boats making occasional long trips. By the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, Sumerian city-states like and Uruk had established a scheduled, treaty-backed commercial highway across the waves. Their survival and splendor depended on it. The Mesopotamian heartland, the fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was rich in grain and clay but desperately poor in almost every raw material needed for advanced civilization. They lacked stone, metals, and precious timber, so they looked south to the sea and built an economic system of astonishing sophistication. At the center of this network was a crucial gateway, the island of Dilmun, which we know today as Bahrain. Dilmun was more than a port, it was a neutral, sacred entrepot. Ancient texts describe it as a pure land, a blessed place where trade could be conducted under divine protection. Archaeologically, it reveals vast burial mounds and a settlement that served as the central clearinghouse. Goods from distant sources would arrive at Dilmun, be logged and often repackaged, and then shipped onward to the Mesopotamian cities. This system created a buffer and a broker, smoothing relations between major powers. So what was flowing along this Bronze Age supply chain? The manifests are incredibly specific. From a region called Magan, widely identified with modern Oman, came massive shipments of high-quality copper, the essential ingredient for Mesopotamia's bronze industry. Ships carried heavy ingots of this critical strategic metal north. From the even more distant land of Meluhha, which scholars equate with the Indus Valley civilization, came a wealth of exotic goods. This included fine carnelian, a deep red gemstone that Mesopotamian artisans drilled and polished into exquisite beads, along with exotic dark woods like ebony, prized for luxury furniture and inlays. There were also pearls from the Gulf's own beds, and likely textiles and organic goods that have long since vanished from the archaeological record. The scale and regularity of this trade is confirmed by clay tablet records from Mesopotamian archives. They speak of planned expeditions, of shipments measured in precise talents, and of formal agreements with the rulers of Dilmun and Magan. This was commerce conducted with the full backing of the state, a recognized and protected system. When we piece this together, a stunning picture emerges. Over 4,000 years ago, the Persian Gulf was a bustling maritime corridor, with cargo ships moving on seasonal schedules between ports governed by international understanding. It connected the urban genius of Mesopotamia with the mineral wealth of Arabia and the artisan mastery of the Indus Valley, creating a triangular circuit of exchange that fueled the Bronze Age world. This network stands as a powerful testament, proving that long before the Silk Road, humanity had already mastered the art of turning a sea into a highway. The cities of the Indus Valley thrived in silence, while Mesopotamia left behind libraries of clay tablets and Egypt inscribed its history on temple walls. The people of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro wrote on perishable materials, leaving us no royal pronouncements or conquest lists. Their story must be read in the objects they made and the connections they forged. And what this silent evidence reveals is a civilization that was not an isolated marvel, but a global economic powerhouse, its reach extending across deserts and oceans with quiet, systematic precision. Their most famous exports were masterpieces of miniature art. Indus artisans perfected the craft of working with carnelian, a hard, deep red stone. They would heat it to enhance its color. Then, using a drill tipped with a diamond point, they would create long, perfect barrel-shaped beads, some so slender and finely pierced they seem impossible for the technology of the time. Even more astonishing are their etched beads. They would treat the white surface of a stone with an alkali, creating a permanent white design on a dark background, often depicting intricate geometric patterns or elegant eyes. These were not just jewelry, they were luxury goods of international renown, status symbols that traveled thousands of miles. Alongside these stones, they likely exported something far more revolutionary: cotton textiles. The Indus region is one of the earliest places in the world where cotton was domesticated and woven, meaning their merchants may have been carrying not just stones, but the very fabric of future comfort to distant lands. To acquire the materials for their own society, they looked outward. We know they imported the celestial blue lapis lazuli from the mountains of Afghanistan. They sought out tin, that crucial bronze-making metal, likely from sources in Central Asia or perhaps even further afield. They acquired gold, possibly from southern India or Central Asia, transforming it into exquisite ornaments. This two-way flow proves they were active, discerning participants in a continental economy. But the most definitive proof of their long-distance relationships comes from the objects that served as their corporate identity, their seals. These small, square stone seals, carved with script and an animal motif like the iconic unicorn, were used to stamp bales of goods, a mark of origin and quality control. Dozens of these distinctively Indus seals have been found in Mesopotamian cities, particularly in the port of Conversely, in the great Indus port city of Lothal, with its sophisticated dockyard, archaeologists have found Mesopotamian-style cylinder seals, pottery, and other goods. This is not evidence of a few chance encounters. It is the signature of a sustained, direct relationship. The presence of standardized Indus weights in Mesopotamia further confirms this, suggesting that merchants from these two great river civilizations understood each other's measures, that they could do business on common ground. The geography makes the method clear. To move bulk goods like cotton or carnelian beads from the Indus Valley to Mesopotamia overland would have been a torturous journey through mountain passes and arid plains. The sea route, however, offered a direct highway. By harnessing the predictable monsoon winds of the Arabian Sea, a vessel could sail from the Indus Delta to the shores of the Persian Gulf in a matter of weeks. This was not a timid coastal crawl, but a bold open water crossing, a maritime bridge between two worlds. The Indus Valley civilization, in its serene and organized way, was not just connected. It was a central anchor in a network that spanned from the Himalayas to the Mediterranean, proving that economic globalization is a story that begins not in the modern era, but in the carefully planned streets of the world's first great port cities. That same current of desire flowed northward, carrying a different kind of magic. While southern civilizations craved blue stone and green jade, the ancient Mediterranean world developed a profound fascination for sunlight trapped in resin. Baltic amber, a fossilized tree sap that glows with a warm, honeyed light, became one of the most coveted substances of the ancient world. Its journey from the chilly shores of Scandinavia to the sun-baked tombs of Greece and Egypt maps one of the most durable and far-reaching networks of them all. This was the amber route, a golden web spun across the heart of prehistoric Europe. The source was singular and remote. The finest amber washed up on the coasts of the Baltic Sea, collected by the local communities who understood its value to distant peoples. From there, it began an epic southward relay. The routes were not paved roads but natural highways dictated by geography. Amber traveled up the Vistula River, through the Moravian Gate, and down the Danube, or moved along the Elbe and Oder river systems. These waterways acted as liquid corridors, funneling the precious material toward the trading hubs of the Adriatic and the Aegean seas. At key points along these rivers, archaeologists find massive hoards of raw amber, evidence of centralized collection and redistribution points where the north-south exchange was managed. The sheer distance involved is almost incomprehensible. For a piece of amber to travel from the Baltic coast to the Peloponnese in Greece was a journey of over 1,500 miles as the crow flies, and far longer following the winding river valleys. This was not a single caravan but a chain of handoffs where the amber passed from one community to the next, its value increasing with every mile it moved further from its source. The proof of this network's ancient operation is locked in time. In the royal shaft graves of Mycenae, dating to around 1600 before the Common Era, archaeologists uncovered beads and ornaments of unmistakable Baltic amber, placed alongside gold masks and bronze weapons. Centuries later, amber appears in the tomb of Tutankhamun, a rare and exotic material from a fabled northern world. This means that over 1,000 years before the classical amber routes of the Roman era were documented, the network was already vibrant and fully operational. It connected the so-called barbarian world of northern Europe directly with the palace economies of the Mediterranean. The local cultures along the route were not passive bystanders, they were active agents. They controlled the flow, set the terms, and in exchange received goods and ideas from the south, like fine metalwork and new styles of ornament. The amber route stands as a brilliant example of how a single, beautiful object could forge a permanent link between worlds that supposedly knew nothing of each other, proving that the map of ancient connection was lit by a warm, golden light from the north. But the most forbidding barrier of all was a sea of sand. The Sahara Desert presents a vision of absolute isolation, a scorching expanse that seems designed to separate the Mediterranean world from sub-Saharan Africa. For centuries, historians believed meaningful contact across this desert was impossible before the arrival of the camel as a pack animal, an event not widespread until the early centuries of the Common Era. Yet the rocks of the desert itself tell a different, much older story. Scattered across the central Sahara, in places like the Tassili Ennaja Plateau in Algeria, are thousands of ancient rock art panels. These are not simple doodles, they are detailed historical records. Among images of giraffes and elephants from a wetter era, we find stunning depictions of horse-drawn chariots, speeding across the landscape with warriors standing tall. These chariots are not the heavy war machines of the Egyptians or Hittites, but light, fast, two-wheeled vehicles, perfectly designed for rapid movement across flat, hard terrain. The style is distinctive and matches artifacts and depictions from the Mediterranean world, dating these images to perhaps as early as 1000 before the Common Era. This is our first clue. Long before the camel caravan, people were attempting to cross the Sahara using the technology they had, the horse and chariot. These were not likely deep penetration routes from north to south, but more probably a series of interconnected corridors, linking oases and seasonal waterholes, operated by desert-adapted cultures who knew where the hidden water lay. The incentive for such a perilous undertaking was the powerful economic logic of complementarity. The desert held one vital resource the southern forests lacked: salt. In the heart of the Sahara, at places like the mines of Tagheza, salt was quarried in great slabs, a mineral essential for human health and food preservation. To the south, in the river basins of West Africa like the Senegal and the Niger, alluvial gold was panned from the rivers, a metal that held little local symbolic value compared to its staggering worth in the Mediterranean and beyond. These two worlds needed each other. A pound of salt could be worth its weight in gold when exchanged at the right point on the map. This created a powerful, gravity-like pull for exchange. Who were the people brave enough to manage this early desert relay? classical sources vaguely refer to the Garamantes, a people of the Fezzan region in modern Libya. Archaeologists have uncovered their fortified settlements and, most tellingly, sophisticated underground irrigation systems called fagaras, which tapped fossil water to create agricultural oases in the deep desert. The Garamantes were not mere nomads, they were desert engineers who built a state capable of projecting power and controlling trade. They likely acted as the critical middlemen, using their horse and chariot technology to connect the Mediterranean coast with the southern termini of trade networks reaching into West Africa. This pre-Camel exchange was undoubtedly slow, seasonal, and fraught with immense risk. It operated on a much smaller scale than the later camel caravans. But its existence is crucial. It proves that the Sahara was not an impenetrable wall, but a challenging membrane. Centuries before the great medieval empires of Ghana and Mali rose to fame by controlling the gold trade, a fragile, persistent corridor was already in operation, laying the logistical and economic groundwork for everything that would follow. The desert, it turns out, was never truly empty, just patiently waiting for its time to become a highway. The very name of the Silk Road is built on a quiet, centuries-old secret. Silk, the luxury that would later define an entire era of exchange, was already moving across continents long before any emperor declared a route open. The most startling evidence comes from a place with no connection to sericulture whatsoever. In the hair of an Egyptian mummy dating to around 1000 before the Common Era, researchers discovered microscopic fibers of silk. This fragment of thread, found far from the mulberry groves of China, whispers of a journey almost impossible to comprehend for its time. How did it get there? The path is not clear, but its presence is undeniable. This was not an isolated incident. In Central Europe, among the salt mining communities of the Hallstatt culture, excavations have yielded silk fragments from a similar period. These finds paint a picture of a trickle, not a flood, of the precious fabric reaching the distant west through the long relay networks of the Steppe and the Near East. This early silk presents a fascinating puzzle for historians. Was this the product of the domesticated silkworm, Bomix mori, a secret closely guarded in early China? Or could it have been wild silk, harvested from other species of moths found in places like India or the Mediterranean? The distinction is crucial. Wild silk trade suggests the movement of a rare commodity, a luxury item passed hand to hand over immense distances. The discovery of domesticated Chinese silk in the West at such an early date, however, would hint at something far more profound: the small-scale, covert transmission of the knowledge itself, the basic principles of sericulture seeping out along those same pre-existing channels. It suggests that not just the finished product, but the very idea of how to create it was slowly migrating. This movement, whether of the fabric or the foundational know-how, completely reframes the later history. When the Han Dynasty officially opened the Silk Road centuries later, they were not creating a new path for a novel product. They were effectively militarizing and scaling up a pre-existing, informal network that had been quietly carrying their most famous secret for generations. The road was named for the silk that had already quietly paved the way. But the most profound cargo carried along these ancient highways was life itself. While stones and metals built palaces and tombs, a quieter, more revolutionary exchange was reshaping the very foundation of human existence. This was the movement of living commodities, the seeds and animals that would permanently alter diets, landscapes, and the destiny of continents. Long before spices or silks defined trade, a prehistoric wave of agricultural globalization was already underway, and its routes were the same hidden networks we have been tracing. Think of it as the original food revolution, a transfer of biological blueprints that took millennia to unfold. The story begins in the Fertile Crescent, the birthplace of wheat and barley. From this single region, these hardy cereal grains began an epic eastward journey, carried not by merchants with ledgers, but by generations of migrating farmers and pastoralists. Their path followed the corridors of the steppe and the highland plateaus, moving through Central Asia. By the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, wheat and barley had reached the river valleys of China, a journey of over 4,000 miles. They did not replace the local staples but joined them, creating a more diverse and resilient agricultural system. In the opposite direction, another grain was making its own westward trek. Millets, domesticated independently in northern China, began to appear in Europe and the Caucasus region by the 2nd millennium before the Common Era. These fast-growing, drought-resistant cereals were perfectly suited to the drier, more variable climates encountered along the steppe routes. Their movement tells us that this was not a one-way street of innovation from a single center. It was a true exchange, a continental conversation where different agricultural traditions met and merged. This exchange of crops represents a deeper, more intimate form of connection than the trade in luxuries. A luxury good like Lapis Lazuli changes the elite who own it, but the introduction of a new staple crop changes everyone. It alters the daily calorie intake of entire populations. It reshapes the farming calendar, and it demands new tools and techniques. The arrival of wheat and barley in East Asia provided a new source of carbohydrates that could be stored, changing social organization and potentially supporting larger, more concentrated populations. Similarly, millets spread westward offered communities a reliable crop for marginal lands, enabling expansion into new ecological zones. Alongside the seeds walked the animals. The domesticated sheep, goat, and cattle that originated in Southwest Asia became the mobile protein and wealth of the pastoralist world. Their spread across Eurasia is inseparable from the movements of the steppe peoples we discussed earlier. These animals were not just food on the hoof, they were a complete economic package. They provided wool and hair for textiles, milk and cheese for nutrition, dung for fuel, and traction for early plows. Their dispersal created a shared pastoral toolkit from the Atlantic to the Pacific, a common way of interacting with the landscape that transcended language and culture. This biological diffusion had a slow tectonic impact. It fundamentally remade environments, as forests were cleared for fields and grasslands were managed for herds. It rewired human diets, introducing new sources of protein and carbohydrates that increased food security. Most importantly, it created a degree of agricultural similarity across vast distances. A farmer in the Yellow River Valley and a herder on the Pontic steppe, though they might never meet or even know of each other's existence, were now participants in a shared, connected biological world. Their daily lives were sustained, in part, by species that had originated a continent away. This silent, grassroots exchange of living things was perhaps the most enduring legacy of all those pre-Silk Road networks, weaving the continents together not with threads of silk, but with roots and fibers, with herds and harvests, laying down the very bedrock of the interconnected world we inhabit today. While seeds and animals transformed landscapes, the most powerful cargo of all was invisible. It was knowledge, the practical understanding of how to shape the world. The transmission of technologies across these ancient networks represents the deepest and most conclusive proof of sustained contact. A luxury good can be a one-time gift or a rare plunder, but a complex technical skill requires prolonged, meaningful interaction to be understood, adopted, and adapted. This movement of know-how is far harder to trace than a lapis bead or a tin ingot, for it leaves no physical signature until it is put into practice. Yet its impact reshaped continents. Consider the revolutionary cascade of metallurgy. The knowledge of how to extract copper from ore and smelt it likely originated in multiple regions, but its refinement and the subsequent invention of bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, created a technological arms race. The spread was not instantaneous, but it was remarkably swift on a prehistoric timescale. The formula for bronze, a specific ratio of copper to tin that produces a harder, more useful metal, appears in archaeological sites from the Aegean to the Indus Valley to the Yellow River within a few centuries of each other. This simultaneity is impossible to explain by independent invention. It signals a pulse of information moving along those hidden channels. Someone had to explain, or more likely demonstrate, the process, the temperatures, the molds, and the sourcing of that elusive tin. This was not a product being traded, it was a recipe being shared. An even more profound shift came with ironworking. The technology for smelting iron from its ore, which requires even higher temperatures and different techniques than bronze, first emerged in Anatolia around 1200 before the Common Era. Its subsequent spread eastward toward India and China, and westward into Europe, is a map of a technological wildfire. The movement of iron was not about the metal itself, which is heavy and cumbersome to transport in bulk. It was about the secret of the furnace, the knowledge of bellows and carburization to make steel. This knowledge traveled with people, likely smiths who themselves moved along established routes, bringing a transformative power that would democratize tools and weapons, shifting the balance of societies. The chariot offers another perfect case study in technological diffusion. This was not a single invention, but a complex system, a package of interdependent innovations. It required the light, spoked wheel, a radical departure from solid wooden discs. It needed a strong yet flexible axle design. It demanded the breeding and training of horses for draft, not just for riding. And it involved the entire suite of tack, the bits, bridles, and yokes to control them. This entire chariot complex appears almost simultaneously in the archaeological records from Greece to Egypt to Mesopotamia to China around 2000 before the Common Era. The speed and geographic range of this adoption is breathtaking. It tells us that the blueprint for this machine, this ultimate symbol of elite power and mobility, was transmitted across the steppe superhighway with incredible efficiency. Communities were not just receiving a strange new vehicle, they were adopting a complete social and military technology, along with the skills to maintain and replicate it. Similarly, the spread of advanced irrigation technologies, like the Kanat or Fagara systems of underground canals that tapped groundwater, moved from a likely Persian origin across North Africa and as far as Central Asia. This was the transfer of a survival strategy, a way to master arid environments. The movement of such a sophisticated engineering concept implies more than casual contact. It suggests the migration of specialists, of well diggers and surveyors sharing their life-saving craft. These transmissions happened largely in pre-literate times without manuals or diplomatic letters. They passed from master to apprentice, from one community to the next, through observation, imitation, and practical demonstration. This is why they are the ultimate evidence. A society might acquire a few exotic trinkets through a long chain of intermediaries without ever meeting the source culture. But to fully integrate a complex technology like bronze casting or chariot building, there must have been periods of direct, sustained knowledge transfer, moments where craftsmen from different worlds worked side by side, speaking the universal language of technique. These invisible exports forged the ancient world far more durably than any traded treasure, building a shared foundation of human capability across unimaginable distances. The goods we can hold tell only part of the story. The words we speak carry echoes of even older journeys, whispers of contact preserved in sound and symbol. When archaeologists find a Mesopotamian seal in the Indus Valley, it is a snapshot of a single moment. But when linguists trace the same word for a wheel or a wagon across languages from Ireland to India, they are uncovering the ghost of a sustained relationship, a shared history that outlasted empires. Language itself becomes a living artifact of these deep time networks. One of the most compelling forms of evidence is the loanword, a term borrowed from one language into another, often along with the object or idea it describes. These borrowed words are like linguistic fossils marking the path of a technology's arrival. Take the word for wine. Its earliest known root is in the languages of the Caucasus region, near the earliest evidence of viticulture. This word then traveled westward into ancient Greek and Latin, and eastward into the Semitic languages. The word moved because the product and the knowledge of how to make it moved carried along trade and migration routes. We see similar patterns with metals. The Sumerian word for copper appears to have been borrowed into early Indo-European languages, suggesting the metal and its name spread together from a center of innovation. These are not coincidences. They signal that when a new, complex technology arrived in a region, it often arrived with its original name because the people bringing it taught their word for it to those eager to learn. This points to direct knowledge transfer, not just the silent exchange of a finished object. The most sweeping hypothesis connecting language to these ancient networks involves the expansion of the Proto-Indo-European language family. This is the reconstructed ancestor of languages as diverse as English, Greek, Sanskrit, and Persian. A leading theory, the Kurgan hypothesis, proposes that this language spread out of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, beginning around 4,500 before the Common Era, carried by the mobile pastoralist cultures we have already identified as key network agents. If this hypothesis is correct, then the spread of this language family was not merely a linguistic event, it was the ultimate form of cultural software transmission. As these steppe communities moved and interacted, their language became a vessel carrying with it a whole worldview, a pantheon of gods, social structures, and the terminology for the chariots, horses, and pastoral life that gave them mobility. This was not necessarily a story of conquest, but of integration and influence, where language acted as the glue for a new, hybrid way of life across a vast zone of interaction. The legacy of this is the profound linguistic kinship felt across continents, a kinship that may have its roots in the very steppe corridors that moved amber and tin. A later and more concrete example of idea transmission is the evolution of writing systems. The concept of writing likely emerged independently in a few places, but its adaptations show clear paths of contact. The Phoenician alphabet, developed around 1000 before the Common Era, was a revolutionary system of simple symbols for consonants. Through Phoenician maritime trade networks across the Mediterranean, this script was encountered by the Greeks, who adapted it by adding symbols for vowels, creating the ancestor of the Latin alphabet we use today. In a parallel but separate process, the Aramaic script, also descended from Phoenician, traveled east along the Silk Road and beyond, evolving into the scripts used for Hebrew, Arabic, and even influencing scripts in India and Central Asia. Each adaptation was not a simple copy, but a creative reinterpretation to fit the sounds and needs of a new language. This spread demonstrates that the networks we have been discussing did not just move things, they moved systems of thought. The adoption of a writing system is the adoption of a tool for memory, law, literature, and administration, a fundamental shift in how a society organizes knowledge. When we trace these words and letters, we are following the most intimate pathways of ancient connection, where minds met and merged, leaving a permanent imprint on the very way we communicate. The landscape itself was an active participant in this ancient story. These networks did not unfold on a stable, unchanging stage, but in a world of dramatic climatic shifts that could open new doors or slam others shut with brutal force. The environment was a dynamic driver, a powerful catalyst that could push societies toward greater connection or scatter them into isolation. To understand the true rhythm of these early exchanges, we must listen to the climate's own history, written in tree rings, ice cores, and layers of ancient lake sediment. These natural archives reveal periods of profound change that directly shaped human decisions on a continental scale. One of the most significant of these global events is known to scholars as the 4.2 kiloyear aridification event, a period of intense drying and cooling that peaked around 2200 before the Common Era. Its impact was not uniform, but its ripple effects were felt from the Nile to the Indus. In regions already living on the ecological edge, this shift could be catastrophic. Prolonged drought meant failing harvests, dwindling water sources, and pastures that could no longer support herds. For settled agricultural societies, this often led to social unrest, the abandonment of cities, and the fragmentation of political order. We see evidence of this in the weakening of the Old Kingdom in Egypt, turmoil in Mesopotamia, and the transformation of the great Indus Valley cities. But for the highly mobile pastoralist cultures of the steppe and desert fringes, this climate pressure had a different consequence. It didn't end their journey, it redirected it. As their traditional grazing lands shriveled, these communities were forced to move, to seek new territories and resources. This wasn't a leisurely migration, it was a necessity-driven push into the lands of their neighbors. Such movements inevitably increased contact and often competition. When familiar resources vanished, societies were forced to look beyond their immediate horizons, to seek alliances or engage in exchange with people in different ecological zones who might have what they now lack. A highland community with stable springs might trade water access to lowlanders for grain. Desert pastoralists desperate for fodder might offer their prized livestock or their services as protectors to farming villages in exchange for food. The climate crisis, in essence, compressed the world. It forced interaction between groups who might have previously kept their distance. This doesn't mean trade was born from disaster, but that existing, tentative networks were suddenly stressed, intensified, and repurposed for survival. The pathways that once carried luxury stones like Lapis Lazuli could now become lifelines for moving bulk grain or guiding herds to safety. The shared challenge of a changing climate could also forge new kinds of partnerships where technological knowledge became the most valuable currency of all. A community with advanced irrigation techniques might share them with a neighbor facing a drying river in exchange for labor or political loyalty. The movement of drought-resistant crops, like the millets we discussed earlier, would have accelerated during such periods as people desperately sought reliable food sources. So, while a statue of Lapis Lazuli speaks of wealth and distant connections, a layer of dust in an ancient lake core might tell the more urgent story of why that connection was strengthened or severed. The climate did not create these networks from nothing, but it acted as a great accelerator or a circuit breaker. It reminded ancient societies that their fates were intertwined not just by choice, but by the very air they breathed and the rains they prayed for. In this light, the ebb and flow of goods and ideas across continents begins to look less like a steady march of progress and more like a pulse, a rhythm beating in time with the changing sky, where hardship itself could become the mother of a deeper, more resilient form of connection. The dazzling treasures we find in tombs tell a compelling story, but it is a story of the few. For every piece of lapis lazuli in a royal necklace or silk fragment in a chieftain's grave, there was a far less glamorous, yet infinitely more important, current of exchange flowing beneath it. This is the critical distinction between the elite networks and the trade in bulk commodities. The first dealt in the rare and the symbolic, objects of prestige meant to broadcast power and divine connection. The second dealt in the foundational and the functional, the raw materials and practical knowledge that built and sustained civilizations themselves. Both systems operated simultaneously along the same ancient corridors, but they moved at different speeds and transformed societies in profoundly different ways. The elite trade is what shines brightest in the archaeological record by design. A king's golden cup or a priestess's amber pendant was meant to be seen, to endure, and to be buried with its owner as a marker of status for eternity. These items traveled incredible distances precisely because they were rare and difficult to obtain. Their value was tied to their exotic origin. A blue stone from a mythical mountain was powerful because almost no one else could have it. This trade required organization and protection, but it touched only the very pinnacle of society. It was a conversation between courts and elites, a way of performing power on a continental stage. Yet for the vast majority of people living in those ancient worlds, this trade was invisible. It did not change their daily meal, their tools, or the roof over their head. The real engine of change, however, was the slower, deeper pulse of bulk commodity exchange. This was the movement of materials not by the handful, but by the ton. Think of the heavy copper ingots shipped from Oman to Mesopotamia, the massive timber logs floated down rivers for shipbuilding, the sacks of grain traded from fertile regions to arid ones, or the essential slabs of salt carried across the Sahara. This trade was not about rarity, but about necessity and volume. It was logistically messy, often handled in stages by many different communities, and its physical evidence is harder to find because these materials were consumed, used up, or rotted away. A tin ingot was melted down to become part of 100 different tools and weapons, its origin forgotten. A shipload of timber became part of a palace or a fleet, its journey erased. But the impact of this bulk trade was utterly transformative for entire populations. The steady supply of tin and copper meant a farmer could afford a bronze sickle, making harvests more efficient and reliable. Access to new timber sources allowed for larger ships, which could bring more grain to feed growing cities. The salt trade preserved food, improving nutrition and enabling communities to survive lean seasons. This was exchange that altered the basic calculus of survival and prosperity for whole societies, not just their ruling classes. It enabled population growth, urban concentration, and economic specialization. A city like Ur could not have existed without the constant bulk inflow of metal, stone, and wood from distant sources. Its very skyline was built on long-distance logistics. Perhaps the most powerful bulk commodity of all was not a material, but a package of knowledge, what we might call technological software. The spread of the chariot complex, ironworking, or advanced irrigation was the ultimate bulk transfer. Once adopted, these technologies replicated themselves locally, changing military strategy, agricultural output, and social structure from the ground up. A single innovator or migrating smith could introduce a technology that would eventually touch every member of a community. This diffusion was slow, often taking centuries to ripple across continents, but its effects were permanent and democratic, reshaping the lives of ordinary people in ways a luxury import never could. So, while the elite networks capture our imagination with their glittering artifacts, the true architects of the interconnected ancient world were these humbler, more persistent flows. The story is not one or the other, but both together. The royal demand for luxuries helped pioneer and finance the routes, proving that vast distances could be reliably bridged. But once those channels were open, they became conduits for everything else, carrying the vital nutrients that allowed civilizations to grow beyond their local limits. The silk for the emperor's robe may have given the road its famous name, but it was the grain, the metal, and the ideas moving alongside it that truly wove the continents together. These grand claims of ancient highways rest on evidence far more subtle than a signpost. How can we possibly trace connections that left no written records, that vanished into the dust of millennia? The answer lies in a quiet revolution in archaeology's toolkit, a suite of scientific methods that allow us to interrogate the silent past with astonishing precision. We are no longer just digging up beautiful objects. We are learning to read their hidden biographies, to ask them where they were born, who handled them, and what journeys they endured. This is the scientific backbone that transforms speculation into validated history, revealing the invisible networks stitch by stitch. One of the most powerful techniques is provenance study, the art of sourcing. Every stone, every metal, every lump of clay carries a unique chemical fingerprint, a signature of the geological environment that formed it. Take obsidian, the volcanic glass prized by ancient peoples for its razor-sharp edges. Using a method called X-ray fluorescence, researchers can analyze the trace elements within an obsidian tool. They compare this signature to a database of known volcanic sources across the Mediterranean and beyond. The result is often stunningly specific. An arrowhead found in a village in central Turkey can be matched not just to a general region, but to the exact volcanic flow on the island of Milos, hundreds of miles away across the Aegean Sea. This doesn't just tell us there was trade, it maps a single, definitive line on an ancient map. The same principle applies to metals. The tin in a Bronze Age sword can be analyzed for its isotopic composition, offering clues that might point toward Cornwall or Central Asia or the Erzgebirge Mountains. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan has a telltale mineral signature, jade from cotton a specific crystalline structure. These are not guesses, they are material truths, allowing us to follow a single piece of stone from its mountain cradle to its final resting place in a pharaoh's tomb. But objects are more than their raw material. The style and manufacture of everyday items like pottery tell a parallel story of cultural conversation. Archaeologists don't just look at a pot's shape or painted design, though the spread of a distinctive artistic motif can be a clear signal. They go deeper, examining the very recipe of the clay, the tempering materials added for strength, and the fingerprints of the potter's technique. They might use thin section analysis, slicing a tiny sample of pottery so thin that light passes through it, revealing under a microscope the mineral grains within. This can show that a pot found in Egypt was not made locally from Nile silt, but from clay sourced in the Levant, and was fashioned using a coil building technique common in Cyprus. This tells us the pot itself was an import, a traveler. Even more telling is when the opposite occurs, when the local clay is shaped using a foreign technique. That reveals something more profound than trade. It signals the migration of knowledge, perhaps a potter who moved, bringing their craft with them and teaching it to a new community. Pottery becomes a text, its pages written in mineral and method, recording the movement of both goods and people. The story grows even richer when we move from artifacts to the environment and the people themselves. Paleobotany, the study of ancient plant remains, uncovers the silent exchange of life. By sifting through soil samples from ancient hearths, storage pits, and even the calcified plaque on human teeth, scientists can recover microscopic plant remains, phytoliths, and ancient pollen. Finding the silica skeletons of wheat or barley grains in a Chinese site dating to 2000 before the Common Era provides direct, tangible proof of that crop's journey from the West. It shows us the actual meal someone ate, a meal made possible by long-distance contact. This biological evidence fills in the gaps left by precious stones and metals, showing us the grassroots, subsistence-level connections that sustain populations. Perhaps the most intimate evidence comes from the ancient people themselves. Isotopic analysis of human remains has opened a window into individual biographies written in bone and tooth enamel. The principle is based on a simple fact: you are what you eat and drink, and the water and food of different regions have distinct isotopic signatures. Elements like strontium, oxygen, and lead get incorporated into your teeth as they form in childhood, creating a permanent record of where you grew up. Later in life, your bones remodel, recording the geography of your adulthood. By analyzing these isotopes, researchers can now ask astonishingly personal questions of someone who lived 4,000 years ago. Was this woman buried with great honor in a Mesopotamian city actually born and raised far away, perhaps in the highlands of Iran? Did this warrior chieftain interred in a German bog spend his early years near the Mediterranean? The answers are rewriting history. They prove that individuals, not just objects, were making these long journeys. They reveal the movement of marriage partners, of skilled artisans, of entire families, painting a picture of an ancient world where human mobility was a fundamental fact of life. This isn't just about tracing trade routes anymore. It's about tracing lives, validating that these networks were woven with human threads, with stories of arrival and belonging that echo across the ages. Yet this emerging map of ancient connection is not a simple, clean diagram. For every clear line we trace, a dozen questions and contradictions emerge from the shadows, reminding us that history is a puzzle with many missing pieces. The evidence we have is powerful, but it is also profoundly incomplete, and interpreting it requires navigating a landscape of scholarly debate and inherent uncertainty. One of the most fundamental complications lies in distinguishing the very engine of exchange. When we find a foreign object or a new technology in an archaeological layer, what story does it actually tell? Did it arrive through peaceful, hand-to-hand trade along a network of mutual benefit? Or was it carried by migrants, entire communities moving with their belongings and customs? Or is it the stark trophy of conquest, a spoil of war ripped from a defeated enemy? These three vectors, trade, migration, and conflict, can produce similar material results but represent entirely different historical realities. A hoard of bronze weapons in a new style might signal the arrival of innovative traders, the settlement of a warrior band, or the aftermath of a raid. Teasing these apart is the daily, difficult work of archaeology, requiring context from settlement patterns, signs of violence on human remains, and subtle shifts in everyday life. Often, the answer is a messy combination where trade opened the door, migration followed the path, and conflict arose from the new pressures of proximity. Adding to the complexity are the ghostly echoes of what we cannot see. Our understanding is skewed toward the durable. We can track stone, metal, and fired clay with relative ease. But what of the ancient world's most coveted invisible exports? Think of the scented oils and perfumes that were worth their weight in gold, the vivid dyes that colored royal robes, the spices that flavored feasts, or the fine linen and woolen textiles that were major economic drivers. These organic treasures, traded over vast distances, have largely vanished, consumed, rotted, or evaporated. A clay pot might retain a chemical trace of a long-lost wine or perfume, a faint ghost in a gas chromatograph, but the vibrant commercial world they represented is mostly silent to us. Even more elusive is the movement of pure knowledge, the song, the story, the philosophical concept, the healing ritual passed from mind to mind without a single physical artifact to mark its journey. These invisible currents were likely the true lifeblood of cultural exchange, weaving shared myths and values across continents. Yet they leave the faintest imprint in the material record we excavate. Scholars therefore vigorously debate the scale and directness of the connections we propose. Was the Silk Road's prehistoric ancestor a continuous, humming highway, or a fragmented series of local exchanges with rare, heroic long-distance leaps? When Baltic amber appears in Mycenae, does it represent a steady, managed flow, or the extraordinary journey of a single, treasured piece passed down for generations? The evidence can support multiple interpretations. Some researchers see the Oxus civilization as a central, controlling hub, a Bronze Age superpower directing trade. Others view it as one vibrant node among many, a participant in a more decentralized and organic web. These are not mere academic disagreements. They are essential debates that shape our understanding of ancient agency and organization. They force us to ask who was really in charge of these networks. Was it the settled states with their written demands, or the mobile pastoralists with their control of the corridors? This constant refinement is not a weakness of the model, but its greatest strength. It means our picture of the past is alive, responsive to each new discovery. Every fresh isotopic analysis of a tooth, every satellite image revealing a lost caravan route in the desert, every meticulous sourcing of a metal ingot adds a new data point, adjusts a line on the map, or introduces a compelling complication. The story of these pre-Silk Road networks is not a solved mystery, but an ongoing investigation, one that humbles us with the sophistication of our ancestors while challenging us to listen more carefully to the quiet, complicated story the evidence is trying to tell. These intricate webs of connection were not destined to last forever. The very fragility that made them so dynamic also made them vulnerable to a cascade of failures. For all their reach, these early networks did not solidify into a permanent, integrated global system. Instead, they experienced dramatic ruptures, moments when the thread snapped and the map of the world, for a time, seemed to shrink back toward isolation. Understanding why this happened is key to seeing the full rhythm of ancient globalization, a story not of steady progress, but of pulsating advance and retreat. The causes were often a devastating combination of local unraveling and continental-scale crisis. Consider the slow fading of the great Indus Valley cities. Around 1900 before the Common Era, the meticulously planned urban centers like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro began a long process of deurbanization. The reasons are complex and debated, likely involving shifts in river courses that disrupted agriculture, combined with a possible breakdown in the very trade relationships that had fueled their prosperity. As their economic power waned, the vital maritime link to Mesopotamia grew weaker. The steady flow of carnelian beads, cotton, and timber dwindled, and with it, a major artery of the Bronze Age world fell silent. A similar story unfolded with the Oxus civilization, that brilliant crossroads in Central Asia. Its fortified centers were abandoned by around 1700 before the Common Era. The collapse of this central processing hub would have sent shockwaves through the networks it facilitated. The filtering and translating of ideas between the steppe, the Indus, and Mesopotamia suddenly had no central station, forcing exchanges to find new, more difficult paths or cease altogether. These were not isolated events. They were preludes to a far wider systemic failure that reshaped the entire Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Scholars refer to this era as the Late Bronze Age collapse, a period centered on 1200 before the Common Era. It was a perfect storm of calamities. A prolonged period of drought and climate instability strained agricultural systems to the breaking point. This environmental stress triggered widespread famine and social unrest. At the same time, the Eastern Mediterranean was disrupted by movements of displaced populations, groups often called the Sea Peoples in Egyptian records, whose raids and migrations further destabilized already weakened kingdoms. The result was a domino effect of collapse. The mighty Hittite Empire in Anatolia vanished. The palatial centers of Mycenaean Greece were burned and abandoned. New Kingdom Egypt contracted, losing its holdings in the Levant. Ugarit, a critical port city in Syria, was sacked and never reoccupied. In the span of a few generations, the entire diplomatic and commercial framework of the region, a system maintained by correspondence between kings and protected trade, utterly disintegrated. Literacy itself declined dramatically in many areas. The long-distance trade in luxury goods, the bulk shipments of copper and tin, the movement of specialist craftsmen, all of this ground to a halt. The networks did not merely slow down, they were severed. What does this mean for our story of early connection? These collapses acted as profound historical resets. The knowledge of certain routes was lost. The trust required for long-distance exchange had to be painstakingly rebuilt, and new political powers eventually rose from the ashes with different priorities. It is a powerful reminder that globalization is not an inevitable, one-way trajectory. It is a fragile achievement, vulnerable to ecological change, social fracture, and the unraveling of interdependent systems. The world after 1200 before the Common Era was in many ways a smaller and more isolated place than it had been centuries before, yet the seeds had been planted. The memory of those connections, the buried artifacts in the ruins, and the lingering fragments of borrowed words and technologies all waited to be rediscovered and rewoven by the civilizations that would follow, setting the stage for the next great chapter of interconnection. When the classical Silk Road finally opened, it was not building from scratch. It was walking into a house that had been furnished centuries before. The legacy of these precursor networks was not a memory, but a living inheritance, a complete operating system for transcontinental connection that the new era simply had to reboot and scale up. First and foremost, they established the very geography of the possible. The later Silk Road did not blaze new trails through untracked wilderness. Its most famous branches, the northern steppe route skirting the Taklamakan Desert, the southern passes through the Pamir Mountains, the Persian Royal Road, these were not discoveries of hand diplomats. They were ancient highways worn smooth by millennia of hooves, feet, and wooden wheels. The routes were already there, tested by climate and conflict, their oases known, their mountain passes mapped in the oral traditions of countless guides. The Silk Road's engineers were not explorers, they were surveyors reading a map written in landscape and legend. Equally crucial was the established menu of desire. The later caravans did not have to convince distant courts to value strange new goods. The markets were already preconditioned. The elites of the Mediterranean and Mesopotamia already craved Chinese silk because fragments of it had been arriving for 1,000 years, making it the ultimate legendary luxury. Central Asian jade already held profound ritual meaning in China. Baltic amber, Afghan lapis, Indian spices, these were not novel introductions. Their value was a centuries-old consensus, their place in the economy of prestige already secured. The Silk Road merely turned a trickle into a flood, meeting a demand that the older networks had patiently cultivated. Perhaps the most vital inheritance was human, the cultures of the crossroads. The later Silk Road thrived because of the Sogdians, the Tocharians, the Parthians, peoples of Central Asia who became the master brokers, translators, and bankers of the trade. But these cultures did not emerge overnight to service a new route. They were the direct descendants and cultural heirs of the earlier Nexus societies, like the Oxus civilization. They grew up in a world already defined by long-distance exchange. Their languages, their mercantile skills, their diplomatic agility, these were traits honed over generations of living at the intersection of worlds. The Silk Road did not create these intermediary cultures. It employed them, leveraging a deep, inherited expertise in managing the flow of goods and ideas between empires. Finally, the precursor networks developed the essential logistical software. They worked out the mechanics of the relay trade, the system where no single merchant traveled the whole route, but goods passed through a chain of trusted hands. They pioneered the use of standardized weights, the prototypes of bills of exchange, and the complex diplomacy required to secure safe passage through multiple territories. They learned how to package goods for long journeys, which animals could carry, what loads across which terrains, and how to navigate by stars and seasonal winds. This was not theoretical knowledge, it was hard-won, practical intelligence passed down through families and guilds. When the Han Dynasty sought to open the West, they were not inventing a profession, they were tapping into a deep well of existing professional knowledge. So the classical Silk Road was less a brilliant innovation and more a spectacular act of synthesis and amplification. It took the corridors mapped by steppe pastoralists, the commodities valued by Bronze Age kings, the mercantile cultures nurtured in Central Asian oases, and the logistical rules written by generations of anonymous traders, and it welded them together with the political will and financial capital of large, stable empires. It placed a governmental stamp on a process that had always been fundamentally grassroots and organic. This is the profound, quiet truth. The Silk Road did not mark the beginning of globalization. It marked the moment when globalization went official, when the ancient hidden web was finally illuminated by the torchlight of history and given a name we still remember. This changes the entire map of the ancient world. For generations, our historical imagination has been dominated by a simple, powerful image: the civilized core and the barbarian periphery. We picture radiant centers of innovation like Mesopotamia or Egypt, beaming the light of progress outward to the dark, passive edges of the world. This core periphery model is not just an old idea, it is a profound distortion of how these networks truly functioned. The evidence we have traced dismantles this hierarchy completely. Those so-called peripheries were not waiting at the end of the line to receive civilization's gifts. They were often the very source of its most transformative elements, and they wielded immense power within the system. To see this, we need to redefine what we mean by power in the ancient world. It was not solely held by kings in palaces who wrote down their own histories. Power also flowed through mobility, through control of corridors, and through mastery of technologies that settled states desperately needed. Take the Eurasian steppe, the quintessential barbarian fringe in the old model. From this vast grassland came not chaos, but the revolutionary package of horse domestication, the chariot, and advanced metallurgical techniques. These were not minor contributions. They were the very technologies that reshaped warfare, transportation, and social structure from China to Greece. The steppe was not a recipient, it was an exporter of civilizational software, or consider the Oxus civilization, the BMAC. Sitting geographically between the great river valleys, it was long viewed as a mere middleman, a passive way station. But as we have seen, it was a brilliant innovator and filter, creating a unique cultural synthesis from the streams flowing through it. It did not just pass things along, it actively processed and transformed them, adding value and meaning. This was not a peripheral behavior, it was the behavior of a creative and strategic hub. Even the Indus Valley, with its silent script, challenges the core narrative. Its meticulously planned cities, standardized weights, and mastery of maritime trade show a society operating on its own profound logic, not as a derivative shadow of Mesopotamia. It was a parallel center of gravity, pulling goods and ideas into its own orbit and sending its exquisite carnelian and cotton out along routes it controlled. The exchange was never a one-way street from a single core. It was a multilateral conversation, a constant negotiation between many different kinds of centers. A Mesopotamian king might demand Lapis Lazuli, but he had no power to mine it. That power lay with the communities in the Afghan highlands. He needed the cooperation of every group along the route, from the pastoralists who guided caravans across the Iranian plateau to the merchants of Dilmun who managed the sea legs. Each of these groups held a piece of the puzzle, and each could set terms, extract tariffs, or redirect the flow. This reframing turns our understanding of ancient agency upside down. The farmer on the steppe who bred a faster horse, the miner in the Afghan mountains who knew where to find the deepest blue lapis, the sailor in the Indus who understood the monsoon winds. These individuals were not bit players in someone else's story. They were essential engineers of a connected world. Their knowledge and their control of critical resources gave them a form of power that was invisible to the scribes in the royal archives, but was absolutely real in the movement of history. What we are left with is a world without a simple center. It was a polycentric ancient globe, humming with activity in many places at once. The light of innovation did not shine from one lamp. It flickered from countless hearths across continents, carried along networks where everyone, from the nomadic herder to the urban merchant, played an active role in shaping a shared, interconnected destiny. The map we are slowly drawing is still filled with blank spaces and question marks. For every connection we can now trace with scientific certainty, a dozen profound mysteries remain, each one a frontier for the next generation of discovery. This is not a story with an ending, but an invitation. Consider the vast, silent expanse of the Indian Ocean. We know Indus Valley merchants were master mariners, their seals found in Mesopotamia. But what did their voyages truly look like? Did their ships laden with carnelian and cotton dare to cross the open Arabian Sea directly, navigating by stars we can only guess they knew? Or did they cautiously hug the coast, a longer but safer journey past the shores of Oman and Iran? The exact sea routes, the design of their vessels, the way they predicted the treacherous monsoon winds, all of this is lost to time, waiting for perhaps a single shipwreck on the ocean floor to rewrite our understanding of Bronze Age navigation. On the opposite side of the world, the amber routes present a different kind of puzzle. We see the golden beads in Mycenaean tombs, we find the hoards along the rivers of Central Europe. But who organized this flow? Was it a loose network of local chieftains, each controlling a segment of a river, exchanging amber for southern metals in a decentralized barter system? Or was there a more formal, perhaps even a ritualized social structure overseeing the entire chain? A priesthood or a guild that managed the value and movement of this solar stone from the Baltic to the Mediterranean? The social engine behind this prehistoric luxury trade remains hidden, its mechanics inferred only from the beautiful cargo it left behind. Then there is the Sahara, that great sandy sea. We have the rock art of speeding chariots proving movement long before the camel. But what was the true scale and frequency of these pre-camel crossings? Were they desperate, sporadic ventures by small bands, or did the Garamantes and others establish something more like a seasonal corridor, using horse-drawn carts and a deep knowledge of hidden wells to move modest amounts of gold and salt? Without the camel's endurance, the logistics seem almost impossible, and yet the evidence insists it happened. Pinpointing how often and with what reliability would tell us just how early and how determined the link between Mediterranean and sub-Saharan Africa truly was. Perhaps the most tantalizing mysteries concern the sources themselves. We speak of tin as the critical ingredient for the Bronze Age, but for many of its key consumers, the original mines are ghost stories. Where exactly did the Mesopotamians get their tin? Was it all from distant Cornwall, or were there rich, now exhausted veins in Anatolia or Central Asia that supplied the early demand? Finding these lost source regions is like searching for the birthplace of a civilization's most vital tool. Each potential discovery, through isotopic analysis or archaeological survey in a remote mountain valley, could redraw the entire economic map of the ancient world. These are not small gaps, they are fundamental questions about how these networks functioned on the ground, day to day. They ask about the courage of individual sailors, the power of unseen merchants, the resilience of desert travelers, and the very locations that fueled global trade. That so much remains unknown is not a failure of research, but a testament to the sheer scale and complexity of what our ancestors built. It means the story is alive, a vibrant field where every dig, every satellite image, and every new laboratory technique holds the potential to illuminate another dark corner of our deep past, reminding us that history's greatest discoveries often lie not in the answers we have, but in the compelling mysteries we have yet to solve. The drive to reach beyond the horizon is written into our oldest stories, while the scale and speed of our modern global connections feel unprecedented. The fundamental impulse is not. The ancient networks we have traced are not merely historical curiosities. They are the first chapters in humanity's longest story, the story of building bridges across distance. The container ships crossing oceans today, the digital pulses carrying data across continents, they follow a blueprint established not in boardrooms, but in the footsteps of steppe pastoralists and the hulls of reed boats. Our ancestors did not have satellites or fiber optic cables. but they possessed the same restless curiosity and the same understanding that survival and prosperity often lay in the hands of a distant neighbor. They sought what they lacked, they valued what was exotic, and they understood that isolation was a greater risk than the perilous journey. This reveals a profound truth about our species. Globalization is not a modern invention. It is a recurring pattern, a deep rhythm in human history that emerges whenever conditions allow, and sometimes even when they do not. It is a pattern of seeking, of finding complementarity, of turning difference into opportunity. The Silk Road, the Internet, these are not the origins of connection. They are its latest and most powerful expressions. They are built upon a foundation of ancient longing, a timeless human trait to trade not just goods, but the very ideas that make us who we are. Recognizing these deep roots changes how we see our own interconnected world. It suggests that the challenges and wonders of a connected planet are not new dilemmas, but ancient ones playing out on a grander stage. The negotiations between local identity and global influence, the vulnerability of long supply chains to disruption, the incredible cultural innovation that happens at crossroads, all of this was present in the exchanges between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley, between the Baltic and the Aegean. Our modern global system, for all its complexity, is following a very old script. It reminds us that the urge to connect is perhaps one of our most defining features, a force that has continually reshaped our world, drawing lines of contact across mountains, deserts, and seas, turning a vast and varied planet into a shared home long before we ever gave it a name. The true legacy of these networks is not found on any single map. It is woven into the very fabric of the world that came after. For millennia before a single official caravan departed Chang'an, a living web of exchange was already humming, moving the essential ingredients of civilization between continents. This is the key revelation that reshapes our understanding. History is not a series of isolated, brilliant flashes, but a continuous, deep current of connection, far older and more intricate than our traditional stories suggest. These forgotten pathways did more than move goods, they quietly assembled the ancient world as we know it. They delivered the tin that forged empires, the crops that fed growing populations, and the revolutionary ideas, from chariots to alphabets, that became the common toolkit of humanity. The classical Silk Road did not invent globalization. It simply stepped onto a stage that had been set centuries earlier by nomadic herders, oasis merchants, and bold mariners whose names are lost to time. Their story invites us to look deeper, to question the clean timelines and simple origins we are often taught. It asks us to see the ancient past not as a collection of separate civilizations, but as a conversation, a constant, quiet negotiation across vast distances that shaped the foundations of everything that would follow. So the next time you encounter a grand historical narrative, a story of a single great invention or a solitary origin point, pause. Look for the threads leading out, the hints of a distant material, a borrowed word, a shared myth. You may just find the ghost of an older, wider world waiting to be remembered.